Alright, hello everybody. This is going to be a continuation of part 3, or 3.5. We're not going to jump straight into the text to that next part just yet. What I wanted to do was go back and touch on a few points. First off, the very first thing I want to do is I want to egregiously apologize, or apologize for the egregious error. I kept saying 1990. When I'm supposed to be saying 990. And basically 990 and the 1100s are a key point in time, and so my brain just kept twisting them into 1100 and then 990, and it kept coming out 1990. So I apologize for that. I realized that, of course, after I uploaded the audio file, that I kept saying 1990 instead of 990. But the Genji Yorimitsu story takes place in 990 AD, 990. If you have the book, which you're supposed to have the book if you're listening to these audio files. If you're listening to these audio files without the book, that's fine, but really you're supposed to be looking at the book while listening to the audio files. So you will see in the book, of course, that it's 990 AD. So again, I apologize for saying 1990. That's just my brain mixing numbers up. I'm thinking 990, but I'm also thinking about the 1100s, because we're talking about Genji tactics being developed and written into manuals in the 1100s. So I'm thinking 990, 1100s. I'm saying 1990. Nothing's happening in 1990. So it's 990 AD, just like is printed in the book. And then the Genji tactics that we're talking about, like, you have Genji Yoritomo, Genji Yoshitsune, Genji Yoshie. All the, there's so many Genji that become well-known warriors, and they write, there's manuals and there's techniques and tactics created. This is all taking place starting in the late 900s up until into the 1100s and the Genpei War, etc., etc. So it's those Genji tactics. It's Genji Yorimitsu, Genji Yoritomo, Genji Yoshitsune, Genji Yoshi, and a whole bunch of other Genjis. This is where the Genji influence on the Kusunoki material comes from. So I guess I'm pretty sure I like to think I was clear on that in the previous videos, but I wanted to retouch on that. First, I wanted to verbally correct the date. It's 990 AD, just like in the book. And it's not just one source of Genji. It's not just one person. It's an entire spectrum. So many Genji samurai creating tactics and methodologies, and that mass collection of technique is the Genji tradition. It's not a particular school. It's not like a school with a headmaster and a grandmaster. It's nothing like that. It's just an amalgamation. It's a giant collection, a culture, if you will, almost like a cultural entity of tactics and techniques. And so this world, this sphere of activity, of Genji war methods. So you could say a collective of Genji war methods is what influenced Kusunoki Masashige when he was developing his system. Of course, as the book explains later on, he studied Chinese war manuals, and he studied Gungaku or Heiho, from when he was an early. So it wasn't like he just got a bunch of manuals and sat down and read them and came up with something on his own. He was formally taught a lot of things. Like, he studied the war manuals. He didn't just read them. He actually kind of formally studied them. He was, as I put in the book, and a lot of people may or may not already be aware, he was a Shingon practitioner. So he did a lot of, there was a temple near where he grew up. He attended the temple pretty much in his youth, and then when he turned 14, he started really cracking on to the military tactics. So he was kind of raised up within a esoteric Buddhist mindset, and then he started and then in his mid-teens, whatever, like 13, 14, he started diving into studying warfare. And at that point, that's when he started studying like the Chinese classics and the Genji material. So it's important to understand that, because it's not like Kusunoki Masashige just came up with everything on his own. It's a tradition. So it's Kusunoki's tradition, but Kusunoki's tradition is rooted in Genji tradition. It's rooted in esoteric Buddhism. It's Chinese classics. So it's a spectrum. It's a continuous flow of thought. That's one of the key things I want to get across here. None of this material just pops up out of the blue without any precursor or predecessor. Everything here is a continuation. So you have a lot of this material, a lot of this stuff begins in the 900s. And, according to the emic perspective, the perspective of the people in question, there's origin stories, like, for example, the Hachiman Daibosatsu tradition says, like, Hijitsu comes from Hachiman, which is ultimately an expression of Amitabha. So basically, Hijitsu is born of the compassion of wise sage beings, because the entire purpose of Hijitsu is to preempt warfare. Now, that's the origin story, or that's sort of the... Again, I hate to say the word myth, because some people actually believe it. So when you say myth, you kind of insult the people that actually believe the story. So what we're going to say is it's an origin story. It doesn't matter whether it's forensically true or only symbolically true, emically true or edically true. It's true to some people, and it has symbolic meaning, and it has symbolic significance. So therefore, whether or not you believe it factually, like, physically took place, is ultimately only relevant within the conversation discussing, like, legal and forensic implications. From a cultural viewpoint, from a sociological viewpoint, a symbolic viewpoint, it's real. So you could say perhaps, that, like, okay, factually, physical reality, it may have never happened, but it happened symbolically, right? So that's another point we need to always remember. There is a separation of between what may be symbolically true and what may be, like, physically true. But there is no requirement to have to decide which one is superior. Both can exist in the same sphere without conflict. In other words, you can believe a story that is culturally and symbolically true, and it is true within the symbolism, within the spirituality, but it may not have physically occurred. It doesn't matter. See, this is an important detail, because in a lot of Western ideologies, something either is true or it's fake, like it either physically took place or it didn't physically take place. And it's only allowed to have symbolic meaning if it physically took place. Otherwise, it's a myth. It doesn't count. It's a fairy tale. It's a story. That is a Western approach. That is a Western European ideology, using a more, I would dare say Japanese mentality, but I would just say a different approach. Or I guess it's fair to say I'm not going to say every Japanese person in the world has ever thought this way, but it is considered kind of one perspective that exists within the continuum of Japanese culture, is that, two conflictory stories can exist within the same sphere, and it's okay. There's no need to resolve the differences. In other words, on one hand, a story can be true factually, like physically took place, physically never took place, like this never actually happened, but it is still considered true from a spiritual symbolic perspective. And there's no discrepancy between those two layers. So this is really, really important to understand, that within this context, within the emic context, something can be real and true even if there's no grounds for it physically being true. There's no need to resolve any potential discrepancy between a forensic reality and a symbolic reality. So what am I getting at? From a Western perspective, there's no way for me to confirm or tell anyone that the Hachiman story is real, right? But from a symbolic perspective, it's real to those who believe it. It is meaningful. It is symbolically real, and then there's no need to resolve that difference within the emic perspective of the people that believe the story. Now, what's interesting though, now what we can go on though, is that the idea, one of the key ideas of here, is that the Hijitsu is meant to sever the ability of the enemy to generate warfare. So that makes two assumptions. That assumes that your side would not engage in unnecessary warfare. Only unenlightened enemies would engage in warfare unnecessarily. And therefore you have to use Hijitsu in order to stop them from having the capabilities to actually engage in warfare. So you're essentially blocking their ability to attack you. That idea, though, we know specifically, as we discuss later in the text in the Scroll of Refining Intention, that idea actually even goes back into Sun Tzu's tactics. There, in the third chapter, Sun Tzu blatantly states the highest military art is severing the enemy's plans. So that entire ideology, that one line, that one idea becomes central to, it's a key component of Sun Tzu. It's a key component of the Six Secret Teachings. It becomes a key component in Kusunokido. It becomes a key component in the Hachiman Daibo Satsu tradition. It becomes, and we see it as a key component in the Fukushima-ryu. It's in Nojiri Narimasa specifically addresses this in the Scroll of Refining Intention. So therefore, what can we take from all of this? You can believe this, you can believe that you can think that's myth or that didn't happen, whatever. But in the end, we have one key idea that is just shining forth from every one of these sources. And that is that this is an art, this is a technique, this is a way to disable the enemy from being able to attack you. It is a preemptive measure. So therefore, this Hijitsu, this Ninjitsu is not meant to be a reactive measure. It's meant to be a proactive measure, a preemptive measure. Therefore, the whole ideology here is how can we prevent conflict from breaking out. And so this is, interestingly enough, this is a Bushi tradition. This is a tradition of warriors, but this tradition actually goes in so many ways a step ahead of the Bushi and says, how can we even make our existence as warriors almost irrelevant? There's that whole statement, there's an ideology that says one should always strive to make oneself obsolete. Now that is sort of a more modern day saying, but you'll see a lot of, at least in my experience, a lot of families, Japanese American families, etc. This idea of make myself obsolete so that the next generation is better, right? You're always trying to just strive to become so good that the next round of people are so good that you then become obsolete, right? So this whole idea of how can I make myself obsolete, ultimately, that's putting the art and putting other people before your own self. Like, you love and care for other people and the art, and you appreciate the art so deeply, and you love and care for other people so deeply, you're willing to develop it to the point where you are no longer relevant. You're obsolete. You've given everything you had and it's grown beyond you, and now you just fade away because you're no longer important. You're obsolete. So in an interesting way, this idea of Hijitsu, which would become Ninjitsu later on, this idea of preempting warfare in so many ways makes warfare obsolete, makes the Bushi obsolete, ideologically. Of course, the reality is, and I discuss this in the book too, the reality is that warfare ends up breaking out to some extent anyway. And Nojiri Narimasa addresses that in the Scroll of Refining Intention when he says, sometimes you have to attack, and therefore to win 100 battles, we'll get to that later. But sometimes war does break out anyway. But the idea is damage mitigation. Ideally, you would cease any conflict. You would be able to preempt and dismantle the enemy's ability to launch any kind of attack or campaign against you. If you don't succeed at doing that 100%, and the enemy still launches some kind of attack against you, your efforts would have mitigated the damage and mitigated the abilities of the enemy so extensively that when the enemy attacks, he's attacking with a small fraction of his capabilities. And then, because he's only attacking with a small fraction of his capabilities, you, who would respond with the full capabilities, are able to easily suppress and crush that attack. So that's the ideology that's present in Sun Tzu's tactics, in the Six Secret Teachings, in Kusunokiru, in Fukushimaru, and in the Hachimandai Bosatsu story. This is a key point. So I wanted to harp on that. I wanted to stress on that because it's a real key point, and you need, and sort of when we get into the Fukushima Shinobi no Maki, I want you to already really understand like the view. What is going on here? Now that I've said that, I want to also address a few more points. So we addressed the Genji clans, the dates, we addressed the view. We also addressed the distinction between emic and etic and symbolic truth and forensic truth. So let's backtrack just a tad bit and let me think. Let me see if it's actually, let me check my book and see if I actually put it where I thought I put it or if I moved it. Oh yes, yeah. Okay, so going back to just before the table of contents where it says warning to the reader, and I said that the reader needs to understand this is a commentary. So this is also important because as a historian, as an anthropologist, because the thing is this, okay, I am an anthropologist first and foremost. I would say I'm a historian second. You guys really only hear and see my historical work because that is what you guys want. I mean, that's what you guys are in for, is the history. But more than a historian, I'm an anthropologist. And and as an anthropologist, of course, I'm an ethnographer and an archaeologist. Now, the archaeology focuses on material culture, and it goes hand in hand with the history. So my ability to really dig into history stems from the archaeology aspect. But I am primarily an ethnographer. I primarily deal with living beings in the present day and field work involved with living beings. So that is actually my primary function. So where am I getting at with this? I'm taking the side note to say anybody who deals with history, whether it's ancient history or present history, we have a responsibility to the people we study, whether they are long dead or whether they are currently living. And now you got to understand, there's the deceased, so the people in history, and then the living. Now, the living people, they are the current incarnation of the people of the past. The people of the past don't exist in some kind of other juju-ish world of mist and clouds or something. Those people are the people who are alive now. In other words, if you now see, this is something that you learn when you go to university. It's one of the first lessons you learn. The things that exist now are the things that we're talking about. Everything, when we discuss history, we're talking about a generic mental image of what took place in the past. There is no such thing as history other than a mental conception. True, forensically speaking, events took place in the past, but there's no way to access those events in the past other than to interact with the material culture and the living descendants that are in the present world. You can't open a doorway and go into the past. You can only interact with the material culture of the present moment and the living people of the present moment. From interacting with the living people and interacting with the material culture, you create a generic mental image of what history could have been. But there never is a way to actually get history. History is a mental conception. It is an extension of the present moment. So I'm very keen on this. When you do any kind of historical work or ethnographic work, archaeological work, sociological work, you have a duty and an obligation to the living people and the current and the material culture to not misrepresent, to not harm, to not damage. Okay? Now there's one exception here, and that is if you represent something truthfully, faithfully, with good intent, everything, and it happens to cause a problem, that's not your fault. Like, for example, when I went to university, there was a professor who did a undercover, long-term ethnography, basically like yoning. He pretended to be somebody else, inserted himself into a rather violent, illegal organization, and then for like a few years just did field work with them. Then later he published his work. Now, you can say that some of his work may or may not have potentially got anybody in trouble, but that's not the point. The point is he told the truth. This is what I'm getting at. If you tell the truth, and then the truth may have implications, that's a different story. So long as you told the truth and you didn't bias it and you didn't try to get someone to, you told the truth. So when we say do no harm, what we mean is like don't lie, right? If you tell something that's true and then that has social implications in the present, that's a different topic. What I mean is you have a duty and an obligation to portray everything accurately. For good or for ill. That's what for good or for ill, everything must be accurate. People will either bend history or cultural studies to make a group of people look better than they were, like, you know, more saintly, or they will try to demonify them or make them into barbarians. Right? Both those have to be avoided. You cannot sanctify, nor can you demonify, whatever, you know, vilify the group. You are required. I mean, it is your duty, it's your obligation to give an accurate picture. Therefore, that is why, okay, so why am I saying all this? Because that is why I'm clear about this book is a commentary. This book is not a historical book. This is not an ethnographic study. This is not an archaeological report. This is a commentary. I need to stress that. I said that in the earlier audio file, but I'm stressing it again. This is a commentary to the Shinobi no Maki, meaning these are my personal thoughts. It's based on historical study and things that I know, whatever. But in the end, it is my word as my word. So this really shouldn't be, this is a history book, but it's really it's a biased history book. So in a way, I'm writing the rules, but it's a commentary. And again, commentary, it's a commentary. There is history to be gained from it. There is theory to be gained from it. There is culture to be gained from it. But in the end, it is not an expression. It's not an unbiased expression of the topic. It is my commentary, which may be biased in some places. And it is. I'll be honest. In some places it's biased, you know. Because, for example, I choose to focus on a particular aspect of something, and I talk on that, and I ignore another aspect, and I'm biasing the commentary a particular way. So you, the reader, the listener of these audio logs, please remember that. This is a commentary, which means it is my personal thoughts on the matter, and the material is... some topics are not addressed nearly as much as they should be if this was an academic work. This is a commentary, so make sure you understand that. Now, that's what I'm getting at under warning to the reader. But if you look at the last paragraph of that section, it says, I would like the reader to understand the value of this Fukushima manual outside of the role of a shinobi manual. Far deeper than being just one more ninja document in the historical record, the manual also serves as a historical marker, a brief glimpse into the larger, deeper political, cultural, and spiritual narratives of individuals involved in the formation of the Fukushima. This is where I'm getting at. This is the key point. This is a commentary, so, you know, be warned. But at the same time, don't look at this book and the material in this book as one more shinobi manual, because that's really, really just a very shallow viewpoint. Take everything I say, everything that's written in the book, and use it to get a better understanding of the narrative of the overall story, starting from 990 AD, potentially, right? The 1100s with the Genji tactics and the different Genji warlords and famous warriors, Kusunoki Masashige, the Nionin War, the Sengoku period, the Edo period. You know, there's an entire spectrum of history here. There's all these flowing traditions. That's what the Fukushima-ryu Shinobi no Maki really is best as. Is not a great ninja manual. It's just a series of techniques that have memory notations, and then there's a scroll of refining intention, And that's it. And then there's the annotations, which divulge a little bit more information. But as a manual as a ninja manual, it's okay, fine. It's not that great. But but as a glimpse, as a blip of history, as a brief glimpse into a conflux of so many different narratives. There's so many narratives. Southern Court or Second Southern Court, Oda Nobunaga retainers, ninjutsu, Nojiri family, the Fukushima family, the Kumazawa. So many different streams are meeting at this one point to produce this very simple manual. That's what I want you to think about. I mean, really, I want you to consider, even such a simple manual as this, Shinobi no Maki, is evidence, is the result of a complicated gathering of so many different flows of history, of flows of personal narratives, flows of family histories, family narratives. So many different things are converging in a single point to produce this very simple manual. So it serves better than a Shinobi manual. It serves as a marker of these different histories coming together at this point in time. And that I really want you to take a moment to consider. So many of these manuals, all these different war manuals and Shinobi manuals, people, we just look at them and we're like, what's its value as a war manual? But beyond its value as a manual, what is its value to the overall history, to the overall memory of the narratives of these human beings? Right? Every one of these manuals was written by a human being who has a story behind him. What's that story? So these manuals, like I said, on one hand they serve as war manuals, but they also serve as records of the human experience behind the manual. And that's what I would like people to really remember. Okay, so let's see. I've covered that. We've covered all these parts. Also, I guess I'll close with this one. If you go back to the Hachiman Daibosatsu tradition story, you'll see this part when I talk about esoteric Pure Land, Kakuban and Shinran form esoteric Pure Land. I also talk about Ippen. And so, sorry for the coughing. The esoteric Pure Land, you'll see esoteric Pure Land pop up a lot in the commentary. Now, here's the thing: in the root text, in the actual manual itself, there is no blatant reference to esoteric Pure Land traditions. It's popping up in my commentary because of what I believe to be true in regards to the history surrounding the topic. Okay, for example, there's one technique where it says, write the kanji for victory in your hand, and then later in the commentary I say you can write the syllable hri for Amitabha, the Amitabha seed syllable. Obviously the manual does not say do this. I'm saying that you can do that because I am aware of details surrounding this spell or details surrounding these people, and I would say, yeah, you can do that. Esoteric Pure Land. So understand that the manual itself doesn't actually reference esoteric Pure Land teachings. I am saying, so you have to trust me, I guess. I am saying that esoteric Pure Land teachings are sort of behind the scenes and can be applied. So esoteric Pure Land. I'm not. There's this erroneous idea that esoteric Pure Land is some kind of illegitimate form of Buddhism or something like that. Like, people are afraid to discuss it and talk about it. Esoteric Pure Land exists in Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, India. It used to exist in Pakistan. Used to exist in Iran. It's not something that's unique to just Japan. Now, it appears unique to Japan because they didn't get the esoteric Pure Land teachings from the mainland per se. What happened was people that were practicing Mikyo got faith in Amitabha. It's called it's personal deity, like Yidam, and that's the Tibetan Buddhist term, Yidam, one's personal kind of deity. When you're a tantric practitioner, you have a guru, a Yidam, and a Dakini, which basically means you have there's a guru, which is the teacher, and then that's represented by a deity. And then there's the yidam, which is your own Buddha nature developing into an enlightened being, which is represented by another enlightened being. And then there's the kini, which is protective energy around you, which is represented by wrathful female deities, right? Wrathful female Buddhas like Marishi or Dorje Pagmo, things like that. Wajiro Waterhi. So, and in the mainland, like in India and Tibet and Bhutan, also the Tara is very popular too. There's so many wrathful female enlightened beings that serve as Dakini. So the point is so these guys like Shinran and Kakuban, they're Mikyo practitioners, like Shingon practitioners. And then what happens is around the monasteries there are Pure Land. There are people that are a mixture of like the Pure Land school teachings, right, which are which are ultimately rooted in the Pure Land Sutras. But I'll discuss that a little bit more. I'll get in a few minutes. I'll get into that just a little bit more. But so these Mikyo monasteries are surrounded by what are essentially like yogis, for lack of a better word. They're non-monks that kind of live around the temples. Sometimes they annoy the monks. And some of the monks are annoyed by them, and some of the monks really like them. So these guys like Shinran and Kakuban, what they do is, they're getting their formal Shingon training, and then they go out and mingle among these they're called hajiri, which are basically these guys that are performing Amitabha funerals for people. They're doing like they're kind of like yogis. Again, yogi may not be the correct word, but it's like that. It's like the Japanese equivalent to the yogis. Like if you think in, say, like Bhutan, there's the monastery that has all the monks, and then surrounding the monastery there's just yogis in different houses and caves and what, like that, right? So it's like that. There's a monastery, and then surrounding it are all these hajiri, which are these kind of yogi. Some of them are very yogi-like, and then some of them are not. That's why yogi is not necessarily the best word. But they are lay practitioners who do Mikyo, and they have just this great devotion to Amitabha. And among them is forming this tradition of a very esoteric Amitabha viewpoint. Now, and then monks like Kagoban and Shinran, they basically for lack of a better word, they start practicing this esoteric Amitabha, and then they have some realization, and then they start producing text, and they just sort of give their practice over to this esoteric devotion to Amitabha. And then from there comes this esoteric Pure Land tradition. Now what I'm about to say. Now a lot of people think this is unique to Japan. This is not. What's very, very interesting is that the teachings, so when these Mikyo monks study with these sort of hajiri, then what happens is they start saying things that are exactly the same things that are said in the Tantra of India and Tibet and Bhutan and Nepal. It's very interesting. So, now I'm obviously a Vajrayana Buddhist, so I believe that they actually had realization, and the reason that their sayings are matching what is being said in the actual Amitabha Tantras and actual Amitabha tantric practices in Tibet and Bhutan, etc., is because they had realization. Because what they're saying there is the same thing that is being said in India, in Tibet, etc., right? So esoteric Pure Land is not unique to Japan. It's unique to Japan from a lot of Japanese believe like they're the only country that has this sort of esoteric Amitabha practices. But the truth is when you go into the Vajrayana of Tibet and Bhutan and northern India and what used to be Pakistan, what it is Pakistan now, but used to be Swat Valley, or it is Swat Valley now, but there used to be a giant Buddhist kingdom in that area. They don't have kind of like a monk went and he realizes from the beginning within the different tantras and the different empowerments and the different initiations, there already exist without any kind of special treatment. It's just there, all of this esoteric Amitabha practice. As a matter of fact, if you go in present day, if you look at like Tibetan Buddhist schools, particularly like the Kagyu and the Nyingma, you'll see that there's a whole section of teaching related directly to tantric Amitabha practice. Vajrayana esoteric Buddhism related to the Pure Land and Amitabha. And so it's there, like it's a big deal. It's not something that people run around screaming about, making a big deal about, but it's absolutely there. So my point is that some people, might be hesitant to talk about the esoteric Pure Land because they think it's some kind of weird little cult that evolved in Japan, but that's just not true. Esoteric Pure Land is 100% part of Tantra, of Buddhist Vajrayana teachings. It's not something that was made up by some wackos. It is absolutely 100% part of Vajrayana. It just so happens that in Japan, it wasn't transmitted to Japan. And so when people were doing the practices and having realizations and producing writings reflective of those realizations, it looked like they were coming up with some new stuff, but it wasn't really new. It was the same stuff that was existing in mainland Asia. It was, it's just that it hadn't been transmitted. So somebody can look at it and say that they're making it up, but I challenge the people that say that they made it up to compare what they are writing to what is being taught in Bhutan, northern India, Swat Valley, Tibet, etc., 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 and tell me why they match. It's the same teachings. So, either they made it up and got really lucky that it matched, or they somehow got the teachings, or, maybe they actually had realization. So, I'm not going to attempt to answer that. All I'm going to say is that don't be hesitant or scared to address the topic of esoteric Pure Land, because it's not some cultish mumbo jumbo thing that was made up by a few people in Japan. It's a very small piece of Pure Land Buddhism, and it's interesting because it straddles between Mikyo and Pure Land. There's a lot of Pure Land practitioners that won't touch it because they don't quite understand it, and there's a lot of like Shingon and Tendai people that won't touch it. So it is kind of like its own little slice of the world, so to speak. But it is not saying or teaching anything that is contrary to what is being taught in Tibetan Buddhism or Nepalese Buddhism, or you know what I mean. So it's not like it's teaching something that is contradictory to what we know to be the Dharma from all the different teachings that have spread through the world. So it's not some dark, twisted, heretic version of Buddhism. But a lot of Japanese people and people that research Japanese stuff are hesitant to touch the topic because it's not clear, like how, for example, Kakuban and Shinran, why what they're saying is different from what is being said by the other people, by their contemporaries, and so therefore it's like, oh, that's weird. But if you compare what they're saying to the mainland Pure Land teachings, it's the same stuff. So anyway, I know that's kind of a long roundabout way, but I want to be clear about that. Like, one, don't be afraid to discuss or investigate esoteric Pure Land. It's not some false cult made up thing that's, it's not. And then, but the main manual itself does not expressly mention it. I, the commentator, am bringing it up because I understand where it fits in within the history of the House of Nojiri. Like the House of Nojiri have an esoteric Pure Land history, and the House of Kumazawa has an esoteric Pure Land history. So I know if the authors of the text are I'm not saying that they are 100% devout esoteric Pure Land Buddhist, but there's a history within the house of esoteric Pure Land. So the methodologies of the esoteric Pure Land could apply. So that's a point that I wanted to also make clear. The manual itself does not mention the esoteric Pure Land, but it mentions things that then within the House of Nojiri there are like parallels that use the esoteric Pure Land. Like, for example, later on in the text there's a thing where it says fold a piece of paper and hold your breath, and there's kuden for this. Then the annotations say the kuden is to do something. But within that method, there is something that you can also do. I didn't put it in the book, so it will be revealed only in the audio or the video, whichever it is at that point. There is something you can do at that point with an esoteric Amitabha, something with Amitabha that you can do at that point. So the annotations say to do something that's kind of Shinto related, but then me, Stephen Ojiri, says, yeah, but in the Nojiri, you can also do this. So does that mean that the manual itself says that? No, the manual doesn't say either one, actually. The original text doesn't say anything. It just says, fold the paper, and there's kuden for holding your breath and something you do at this point. It's the annotations that say, write this particular flower's name, da-da-da-da-da. Well, then the annotations are basically a comment, are Terazawa Sensei's opinion on that, right? 200 years later. So then I, Stephen Ojiri, am saying, yeah, but as an Ojiri, we also can do this. So, but I didn't put it in the book, but I will talk about it in the when we get there in the audio file. But again, so basically this is just going through and I'm trying to sort of clarify some points and pinpoint some things and make sure that when we finally get into the text, all of these points are really understood. All right.